F for Fake is like no other film ever made. It's a kind of essay, I suppose you could say, or it's not really a documentary, but it's a kind of a documentary essay. It's as though you said to Orson Welles, what do you have to say about the subject of fakery, art forgery, charlatanism, magicianship, the idea of authorship, and experts? This all began as a documentary that Francois Reichenbach had made about Elmire de Hory, probably one of the most notorious art forgers of the 20th century, who of course never admitted to ever forging, but was clearly known to be an art forger. He passed away now. And one of the people who was involved in the documentary was a man named Clifford Irving, who was interviewing de Hory on film, and who had also written a book about de Hory called Fake, a kind of a biography of this man who was Hungarian and lived in Ibiza. And while this documentary was being finished, Clifford Irving became rather a notorious figure in his own right because he claimed to have written an autobiography of Howard Hughes, which got a tremendous price in the marketplace. It turned out that it wasn't real, but that it was a fake. That in fact, Clifford Irving, obviously inspired by Elmire de Hory, had gone into another field, leaving the painting and gone into literature, and had created this extraordinarily elaborate fake autobiography of Howard Hughes. It was so believable, the handwriting had been forged so well, that Howard Hughes had to make an unprecedented move of talking to the press. He refused to be photographed, but he did a recording of his voice on a telephone conversation, telling them that he'd never heard of Clifford Irving, he never did an autobiography, and that this was a fake. Orson then, inspired by all this happening at once, and seeing this material that Francois Reichenbach had shot, had an inspiration and decided to do a kind of essay documentary, taking Reichenbach's material, shooting more material of his own, re-editing Reichenbach's material however he wanted to, putting it all together into a whole kind of speculation on fakery. The first part of it, the first hour or so, it really concentrates on this amazing kind of series of events that led from de Hory to Irving to Hughes to everybody being a fake, to Orson having been called a fake himself in his career and a charlatan. And it veers into yet another form. It goes into a whole complicated situation about Picasso, 22 allegedly missing Picasso drawings, and how they connect with Oya Kodar, who was supposedly Picasso's mistress. And that's rather a funny sequence, too, that's very, very playful and mischievous and very Wellesian, how it resolves itself. I think that my favorite moment is when he talks about Chartres, this extraordinary cathedral of Chartres, which nobody knows who designed. And so Orson talks about how its authorship is anonymous. And he connects that to the whole idea of authorship and the whole idea of fakery. I knew Orson when he was making F for Fake, and it took up a lot of his time, the editing of it, which is, as you can see, it's quite complicated and quite complex. Some of it was 16 millimeter blown up, and then he shot footage that was in 35 millimeter and so on. And it was quite a difficult job, the editing of it. And he was quite pleased with the way it turned out. He thought that it would work from the sensational aspects of the thing with Irving and Howard Hughes. I mean, that was a big story in its day. He thought that that would, carry the picture commercially. Unfortunately, it didn't. And he was disappointed. The picture really didn't receive any proper distribution in America, and a little bit better in Europe. It was shown at film festivals. I remember I tried to help Orson sell it and had a screening for Joseph Levine, who had his own distribution company at the time, Avco. He fell asleep and then woke up and said, yeah, I'll buy it, and then didn't offer enough money. It's an unusual film. If you get on the film's wavelength and listen to what he's saying and watch what he's doing, it's riveting. And it takes you along through the rhythm of the cutting and the rhythm of Orson's personality. If you fight it and you expect it to be a linear kind of thing, then you're not going to enjoy it. Ironically, it turns out to be the last film he completed before he died. He did a documentary for German television called Filming Othello, which is very different. It's just him talking about making Othello. So it's not really like this film. It's not as complicated in the editing or anything. He did make another film that he shot called The Other Side of the Wind, but it was never edited, although those of us who care hope that one day it will be. So F for Fake was really Orson's last film. And I know he wanted to do a whole bunch of kind of essay documentaries, a kind of new form, which really hasn't been done. You know, there are documentaries, but never been one that's kind of as personal and as quirky and as unusual and as philosophical as F for Fake. It really stands by itself, brilliantly edited and conceived. It's sort of like visual music. It takes you somewhere, and if you're a willing participant, it really takes you someplace great.